statements. President Trump has said outright that the reason the FCC should revoke broadcast licenses is because of negative coverage of his administration. I want there to be journalism that looks at things.
Senator Jacky Rosen delivered a blunt warning about free speech, accusing the Trump administration of using government power to punish media outlets for criticizing the president. She called the alleged FCC threats against comedians and broadcasters a clearest possible violation of the First Amendment.
But thank you for your testimony, and I recognize Senator from Nevada.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today and speaking your mind. It's about the First Amendment. Appreciate that. Because the freedom to express yourself and speak your mind is the cornerstone of America. It's one of the main ways we distinguish ourselves from other nations. In the United States, you are free to criticize whomever you want, including government leaders, without government censorship. And so it is wholly appropriate and indeed necessary for this committee to hold oversight hearings that focus on protecting this critical right from being eroded by anyone. But that is not the focus of today's hearing. Rather than providing us with a forum that will evaluate truly harmful government censorship, this has become increasingly commonplace under the Trump administration. We're undertaking an effort to settle old political scores against an administration that is no longer in power. There are issues that we have to deal with, and we do want to support, and we must support free speech. But this hearing is not the place. 2 weeks ago, I sent a letter to Chairman Cruz calling for the FCC chairman to testify before this committee after he threatened to revoke broadcast licenses over Jimmy Kimmel's comments criticizing President Trump. I was particularly concerned, as I know the chair was from his statements calling the threat mafia-like. Chairman Cruz called the threats mafia-like. With this clear attempt to suppress speech, comedian. However, I'm disappointed that that's not what's the focus of today's hearing. Chairman Carr's later backtracking, claiming there's some sort of local community exception to the First Amendment. There's no exceptions. You have free speech or you don't. We know those limits. There's precedent for that. His comments, Chairman Carr's, were reprehensible, and his demands of full accountability. And we demand full accountability. Indeed, his weak excuses have been repeatedly contradicted by the president's own statements. President Trump has said outright that the reason the FCC should revoke broadcast licenses is because of negative coverage of his administration. I want there to be journalism that looks at things. This is the clearest possible violation of the First Amendment. The President of the United States directing an agency to revoke a license of networks that run a critical story of him? There never would have been press or print or TV or radio. You could go back 250 years if all presidents did this. This is government censorship by our president, plain and simple. It's what they do in Russia. It's what they do in North Korea. It's what they do in China. It is not what we do in a democracy that has a First Amendment. Those attacks on free speech, they harm not only our democracy, but our economy. Last month, it was Brendan Carr's interference in the private business decisions of large media companies, but tomorrow could be tech, energy, tourism, any other industry could be impacted. In Las Vegas, we're seeing fewer international tourists because people are afraid to come to the U.S. under this administration. People planning to travel to the U.S. see this administration detaining people for posting something online that's critical of the president in another country where they live. And they cancel their trips to America out of fear of U.S. government retaliation. And the consequences for our economy are substantial. So, Mr. Kimmelman, can you discuss the direct impacts of infringement on speech rights? And can you tell us what you see as the biggest threat to the First Amendment writ large, please?
Well, the threats, coercion, chill speech. Either they suppress directly or create an environment in which everyone is afraid to speak his or her mind, to engage in debate, to have the kind of open discussion that our democracy requires. So it's extremely dangerous. Obviously, as you point out, when the government does it directly, it is horrible. It is a First Amendment violation. It needs to be stopped. But it also can happen when tech platforms become too powerful, when they don't face competition, when they play a gatekeeper role. This could be the same if there's too much roll-up of media, and it's the most popular media. Senator Moreno made a good point. There's so much more out there than before, but it's not just availability. It's what do people rely upon? What is most popular? What do they need to get news and information? And so anywhere there's a chokehold, I think there's an appropriate question of, is it too much concentration? Is it too much power? Does it work for our democracy? And that's where Congress has a role to set guardrails.
Thank you. I see my time is up. Appreciate this hearing and wish that we would be having Chairman Carr here to discuss some of free speech on the open platforms. I look forward to Chairman Cruz working with us to get get that on the docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm told that we will do that. We need to open the government up first, right? That's the first priority. I will also note that I asked the chairwoman to have Lena Khan come before this committee.
Senator Jacky Rosen used her time to turn the hearing toward what she argued is a much bigger threat than partisan politics: government retaliation against speech. Rosen began by stressing that the First Amendment protects Americans' ability to criticize government leaders, including the president, without fear of government censorship. She argued that this freedom is fundamental to American democracy. Her main target was the Federal Communications Commission and its chairman, Brendan Carr. Rosen referenced Carr's public comments concerning comedian Jimmy Kimmel and argued that threats involving broadcast licenses become especially serious when they appear connected to criticism of the president. Her point was simple: the government should not have the power to threaten a broadcaster because it dislikes what is being said about the president. Rosen then went even further. She argued that President Trump himself had publicly discussed revoking broadcast licenses in response to negative coverage of his administration. Rosen described that as government censorship and warned that such behavior would be fundamentally incompatible with a free press. She delivered perhaps the strongest line of her questioning when she called it the clearest possible violation of the First Amendment. Rosen also warned that the consequences could extend beyond television and comedy. If government officials can pressure media companies over political criticism, she argued, other industries could eventually face similar pressure. That, she said, creates a chilling effect where businesses, journalists, and ordinary Americans become afraid to speak openly. The discussion then broadened to the economy. Rosen pointed to concerns that international visitors could become less willing to travel to the United States if they believe people can face government retaliation for political expression online. She argued that protecting free speech is therefore not only a constitutional issue but also one that can affect America's reputation and economy. The witness agreed with the broader concern, explaining that government threats and coercion can cause people to self-censor, even when the government does not directly ban their speech. That is ultimately what made Rosen's questioning significant. She delivered perhaps the strongest line of her questioning when she called it the clearest possible violation of the First Amendment. Rosen also warned that the consequences could extend beyond television and comedy. If government officials can pressure media companies over political criticism, she argued, other industries could eventually face similar pressure. That, she said, creates a chilling effect where businesses, journalists, and ordinary Americans become afraid to speak openly. The discussion then broadened to the economy. Rosen pointed to concerns that international visitors could become less willing to travel to the United States if they believe people can face government retaliation for political expression online. She argued that protecting free speech is therefore not only a constitutional issue but also one that can affect America's reputation and economy. The witness agreed with the broader concern, explaining that government threats and coercion can cause people to self-censor, even when the government does not directly ban their speech. That is ultimately what made Rosen's questioning significant. Her argument wasn't simply that one comedian or one television network deserved protection. It was that the government must not be allowed to turn regulatory power into a weapon against political criticism. For Rosen, protecting the First Amendment means protecting the ability of Americans, and the press, to criticize those in power without fearing punishment from those same people. And that is why she wanted the FCC chairman directly before the committee to answer for his comments.